Okay, so for this session, we're going to have shareholders equity. Comprehensive tayo for all the basic items, excluding um, items which involves the computation of book value per share, uh, earnings per share, and share-based payments. That will be for the next sessions. So for shareholders equity, basically if you look into the standards such as PAS1 or IAS1, ang ginagawa lang dyan is they simply provided you with the components of shareholders equity. Walang masyadong discussion or specific discussion on how you're going to account for shareholders equity. Kasi nga, your accounting standard does not assume na yung companies ay corporation lang. So, for reinforcement lang yung discussion natin ng shareholders equity dito kasi basically for corporate setup, kung i-discuss yan sa or discuss yan sa RFBT, yung mga legalities natin for corporation doon ay di-discuss in detail yan. What we are going to focus on will be the transactions involving shareholders equity. Okay, so let's start first with the components of your shareholders equity. So your shareholders equity basically contains 4 items, no? We have the share capital, your retained earnings, your other comprehensive income, and your treasury shares. Okay? Actually, yung treasury shares, pwede mo naman siyang ilagay as part of share capital kasi considered naman yan as a share capital transaction or transactions with owners. Although, just to recognize the portion that is not outstanding, okay, pwede mo siyang i-separate. Okay? Also, for consolidated reports, may masisingit na isa pang item which is yung non-controlling interest. Kung meron mang non-controlling interest doon sa ating consolidated financial reports. Pero of course, that is already for advanced financial accounting and reporting in relation to business combinations. Okay. So, share capital muna tayo. So, the components of share capital are basically, meron tayong preference shares, okay, which is yung ating capital for kung meron tayong ini-issue preference shares. Okay, we have ordinary shares, subscribed share capital. Of course, the subscribed share capital will be recognized also at par value or stated value. Okay? If there are any subscriptions receivable, it will be deducted. Okay? We have share dividends distributable, added yan kasi yan yung kapag nagbawas ka ng retained earnings for stock dividends. So, eventually, the stock dividends will become part of either the preference share or ordinary share depende kung ano yung naka-issue or yung i-issue dito sa stock dividends. Discount on share capital is a deduction kasi parang kabaliktaran yan ng share premium. Although there is a rule, no, na bawal mag-issue ng shares at below the par value. Okay, so generally kapag may discount on share capital, it is going to be charged against the subscribers or the shareholders later on. Sisingilin mo rin yan kasi bawal ngang mag-issue ng shares lower than par value or stated value. We have liquidated capital. Ito yung pertaining to dividends na beyond the balance of your retained earnings. So nag-issue ka ng dividends na lampas na doon sa balance ng retained earnings. So this is not return on capital, it is already return of capital. So it is going to be treated as liquidated capital. Take note, yung dividends out of or yung dividends na beyond the retained earnings is not a retirement of shares. Okay? So you might be thinking na bakit sir hindi na lang natin ibawas sa preference share or ordinary share? Kasi the reason is hindi naman tayo nag-retire ng shares. Okay? Kumbaga, nagbabalik lang tayo ng capital ng mga shareholders. Pero wala naman tayong retirement na ginawa. So, wala dapat entry for the reduction of preference share and ordinary share capital. So, i-recognize mo siya as a separate line item. Okay? You also have share premium, and your share premium is accounted for, or basically your share premium is the catch-all category ng lahat ng excess ng mga equity transactions natin that are not pertaining to your basic share capital items sa taas. Okay? So, dyan na papasok yung share premium ng preference shares, share premium ng ordinary shares, share premium ng treasury shares, any amount pertaining to warrants, options, yung mga rights natin na may value or rights na in-acquire natin, including donated capital. So, basically, yung ating share premium is the catch-all category or basically tagasalo ng lahat ng excess ng transactions pertaining to share capital. Okay, so yun yung ating share premium. For retained earnings, basically the contents of your retained earnings are the appropriated and the unappropriated portions. Yun lang naman yun. Pag sinabi nating unappropriated, these are the retained earnings that are available for dividends. Okay, tapos yung appropriated naman, these are your retained earnings that are appropriated either through legal, constructive, or voluntary purposes. Okay? Kapag sinabi nating legal, generally ang pinaka-main example natin for legal appropriation is kapag nag-acquire ka ng treasury shares. Okay? The amount of treasury share that you acquired needs to have a certain appropriation of retained earnings equal to the amount of the treasury shares that were acquired. Okay? That is a legal requirement. Meron tayong tinatawag na constructive. These are basically appropriations in relation to contracts or yung mga policies that you created. Like example, ito yung mga appropriations kasi meron kang mga contingencies, mga appropriations kasi meron kang sinabi sa contract or in a particular contract of loan siguro, ganyan, na i-reserve mo yung portion ng retained earnings to protect against possible na, or just in case hindi mo mabayaran yung utang later on, parang protect siya, parang gano'n. Pag sinabi naman nating voluntary appropriations, ito yung mga wala ka naman talagang obligation, whether legal or constructive, pero you wanted to appropriate retained earnings in order to use it for other purposes, such as appropriations for plant expansion, appropriations for future projects, okay, yung mga ganun. So those are basically your appropriations. Okay? Other comprehensive income naman tayo, di-discuss lang natin siya pahapyaw, okay? Hindi natin siya i-discuss ng kabuuan kasi part yan ng financial statements later on. Although we just need to understand na because of the changes in your PAS1, yung dating 5 component ng ating OCI, nadagdagan na yan. Hanggang letter J na yan. Actually, 10 na yan. Tama, 10 na yung component ng other comprehensive income natin. Yung dati is yung 5 lang. Yung actuarial gains and losses, yung cash flow hedge effective portion, translation adjustments, unrealized gain or loss ng FOC securities, tapos yung revaluation surplus. Yun lang yung 5 component. This time, nadagdagan na yan ng components for from letter F to letter J. Okay, so ito yung original. Yun yung original na meron. Yan, for some books, yan kung luma yung libro, hindi updated, 5 lang yung component ng other comprehensive income. Okay? Pero for situations, okay, or for the updated standard natin, particularly PAS1, may madadagdag dyan. So, focus tayo dun sa F hanggang J. Okay? So, yan yun. So, ito, for particular liabilities designated as FVPL, the amount of the change in fair value that is attributable to change in the liabilities credit risk. This is as a result of the change also in IFRS 9. Okay? Yung na-finalize na version. So, yung credit risk, okay, changes in credit risk, okay, is reported in OCI. Okay? Tapos, change in the value, okay, of the time value of the options when separating the intrinsic value and time value of the option contract. So, yan ay hedge accounting. Okay, next tayo will be yung change in the value of the forward element o forward contracts ulit. So, this is also in relation to hedge accounting. So, letter I yung sa insurance contracts natin. Okay, as provided by IFRS 17. Okay, so that is going to be All that's also going to be reported in other comprehensive income. And finally, yung finance income and expense from reinsurance contracts. Also, coming from IFRS 17. So, the reason kung ba't nadagdagan yung contents ng ating other comprehensive income is because, number one, yung effect ng finalized version ng IFRS 9 pertaining to hedge accounting, okay? And of course, yung credit risk effect, okay? And number two, yung application or yung pagkakaroon natin ng bagong standard which is IFRS 17 insurance contracts. Yun. So expected na IFRS 17 is going to supersede the old IFRS 4 na insurance contract. Okay? So yun yun. So those are basically the content. So from 5, nagkaroon tayo ng additional 5. So 10 na yung component ng ating OCI because of the updates also in our standards. Although, discuss natin in detail pag nandun na tayo sa financial statements later on. Okay. Okay, finally, we have yung treasury share components natin. Okay, so treasury share naman wala namang kailangang i-discuss dyan na laman kasi ang laman lang talaga ng treasury shares yung mismong treasury shares at cost. Diba? So, yun lang siya. Yung discussion natin ng mga various treasury share transactions nasa baba. Later discussion pa. Okay. So with that, those are the 4 components. We have your share capital, your retained earnings, your other comprehensive income, and your treasury shares. Okay? Isama na lang natin dito yung non-controlling interest. Okay? So yung non-controlling interest in the case of consolidated reports. Case of consolidated reports. Yan. Just in case lang naman. Okay, so yan yung considerations natin. Okay. So let us now discuss various transactions, okay, that are going to affect the components of our shareholders' equity. Okay. So these are the transactions that we are going to account or that we're going to consider later on. First will be yung mga share capital transactions natin such as yung authorization, subscription, issuance, acquisition, reissuance, and retirement of your shares. So those are items that will affect both your share capital. In the case of retirement or reissuance, may effect yan sa retained earnings, okay? May effect yan sa treasury shares later on, okay? Kasi yung reissuance, diba? Parang in-acquire mo tapos i-reissue mo ulit. Okay, so these are those items. Next, origination of other equity instruments such as share options, detachable warrants, and equity components of compound financial instruments because this will generally increase the share premium portion of our shareholders' equity. Okay? Distribution to owners or basically our dividend transactions which is going to affect our retained earnings. And eventually, kung ito ay share capital, so kung share dividends yan, it will also affect your share capital later on. Okay? Transactions giving rise to other components of equity or yung sinasabi nga natin na other comprehensive income. And then, recapitalization and quasi-reorganization. Pag sinabing recapitalization, iibahin lang natin yung structure ng share capital. Basically, it's either babawasan mo yung par value, yung mga ganyan. So pagdating sa, if you're interested in looking into certain recapitalization, pwede rin yung example niyan is yung nagtaas ng authorized capital stock, etc. Madaming example na ganyan. Mas ma-appreciate mo yan kapag nagmo-monitor ka ng mga stocks sa Philippine Stock Exchange. Okay, or other, kahit sa ibang stock exchanges. Kasi usually, kapag may material recapitalization na nangyayari, dinidisclose yan. So makikita mo yung effect niya. Okay? And next is quasi-reorganization, which basically helps the company to have a fresh start without actually reorganizing. Kaya nga quasi-reorganization lang. Kunyari lang, mag-reorganize pero hindi talaga. Okay? So yun siya. Okay, so let us go to your various transactions na. Okay, so we start first with our share capital. Okay, so yung share capital transactions natin, dalawa kasing method yan, no? So, yan yung memorandum method at saka yung journal entry method. So, yung main difference lang naman ng dalawang to is how you are going to account for the unissued portion. Okay, unissued portion of your share capital. Or how you are going to account for the authorized capital of the company. So, ang madalas na na-encounter nating problem, yung memorandum method. Okay? Kasi sa memorandum method, kapag may authorized capital ka, sabihin mo lang, the company has a total of blah 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 number of shares with par value of blah blah blah, ganun lang. Pero, sa journal entry method, kapag may, ang tawag dito, kapag gusto mong i-account yung authorized capitalization mo, ang ginagawa dyan, naka-credit yung total authorized share capital, tapos naka-debit yung unissued share capital. So, kumbaga, debit unissued, credit authorized. So, kung titignan mo yon, ang net effect niya, zero. Okay? Tapos, kapag nagkaroon ka ng issuance, i-credit mo yung unissued. Okay? So, parang ang labas doon, para makuha mo yung issued, that's basically authorized, minus yung balance ng unissued. So, ganun yung item niya. Which is also the same kapag naka-memo and memorandum method ka. Pero sa memorandum method, ang nire-record mo lang is yung mismong na-issue mo na shares. So, it's up to you kung gusto mong gumamit ng memorandum or journal entry method. Pero, basically, for board exam purposes, pakikita mo naman kung anong method yung ginamit nila based on the account titles na nandoon sa reports. Okay? So, kapag may nabasa kang unissued share capital na account, malamang journal entry method yung ginawa niya. Okay? Yan. So, ano yung classes of shares natin? Usually, dalawa lang naman talaga yan, ordinary at saka preference shares. Okay? Pag sinabi nating preference shares, yung preference shares may iba't ibang features yan. Okay? Meron tayong non-cumulative, non-participating, merong non-cumulative pero participating, merong cumulative pero non-participating, tas meron yung cumulative na nga participating pa. Okay? Also, a company can issue more than one type of preference share. So, pwedeng preference share na 8%, may preference share na 12%, so depende. Okay? For as long as it is part of the authorized capital that was approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission or a similar body, okay? Or similar regulatory agency. Okay, nung na-incorporate yung entity or kung in-approve man yan for subsequent amendments. Okay, so ganoon lang naman yan. So, ang issue natin dito, kasi yung preference share, syempre kailangan may par value yan. Pero yung ordinary share, it's either with par value or without par value. Kapag walang par value, it's either may stated value or walang stated value. Diba? So, yun lang naman yung concern natin dyan. So, in the case of ordinary shares na either may par value or may stated value, at least alam mo kung magkano yung nakikredit natin doon sa ordinary share capital at kung magkano yung excess na mapapasok sa share premium. Pero kapag no par, no stated value, every transaction, lahat ay papasok lang sa ordinary share capital. Walang share premium na ma-recognize. Okay, so yun lang naman yan. Next, we'll discuss yung 4 basic rights of ordinary shareholders. Yung mga yung mga medyo may effect lang doon sa ating or yung mga usual lang na encounter. Okay, first is the right to attend and vote. Okay, kapag hindi ka maka-vote on your own, pwede kang mag-issue or pwede kang mag-vote through proxy. Okay? Yan. Meron din tayong right to purchase additional shares, also known as preemptive rights or stock rights. Para hindi ma-dilute yung or hindi magalaw yung percentage ownership mo sa isang company. Next is right to share in the corporate profits, okay, also known as your right to dividends. And right to share in the net assets of the corporation upon liquidation. Okay, so in the case lang na mag-liquidate na yung negosyo. Okay, so we go to share premium. Okay, so ang share premium naman natin, also known as yung, di ba, yung other reserves, di ba, or yung mga reserves ng isang entity, Ang other term niyan, additional paid-in capital or whatever. Kasi yung mga nakalagay sa PAS1 na account titles, those are just the prescribed account titles. Kung gusto mong gumamit ng iba, okay lang naman. So, the usual sources, di ba, ng ating share premium will be yung mga excess. Okay, excess doon sa subscription price over the par or stated value. Okay, yan na yung share premium preference and ordinary shares. Number 2 is the share premium treasury shares. Okay? Number 3 is yan na yung mga options, warrants, yung mga rights, okay, or yung mga other equity component ng compound financial instruments. Okay, kapag nagkaroon ng distribution ng small stock dividends later on, kasi papasok din lang yung excess sa ating share premium. Generally, either either ordinary or preference shares din naman yung pupuntahan yan. And then, in the case of kasi reorganization and recapitalization, kasi papasok din sa share premium yung excess. So, of course, pag sinabi naman nating share premium, ang lagi lang nating tandaan, yan yung tagasalo ng lahat ng mga sobra, okay, na attributable sa ating equity. So, yan. Next, we go to legal capital. So pag sinabi nating legal capital, di ba, this is the amount or the portion of the capital that cannot be distributed to owners kasi this is an amount that is for the protection of the creditors later on, di ba? So yun yung in case na magkaroon ng dissolution or liquidation ng isang corporation. So kumbaga naka-reserve yan for creditors. So ang computation ng legal capital is depende kung may par value ba or walang par value yung shares. Kapag yung shares mo may par value, ang legal capital is of course the aggregate par value of all the shares issued and subscribed. Kapag naman walang par value yung shares, ang legal capital mo is kung magkano yung total na receive mo upon the issuance of the no par value shares. Okay? So lahat-lahat, okay? Kahit sabihin mong may kasama pang share, kahit sabihin mong may stated value naman, sir, dapat yung stated value lang, hindi. Kasi that is a legal requirement kapag no par value yung shares. Kahit sabihin mong may stated value, ang naka-reserve pa rin for shareholders, for creditors will be the total consideration upon the issuance of your no par value shares. Okay? So, yan. Next, we go to the share issuance cost. Wala naman tong hindi naman masyadong complicated yan. So, in the case of share issuance cost naman, di ba, in other words, nag-issue ka ng shares, meron kang ginastos na mga other items para ma-consummate natin yung share transaction na yon. So, the concept here is, of course, all share issuance cost will be a deduction to your equity. So pag sinabi natin deduction to equity, it is generally a deduction to your share premium, okay, or yung excess. To the extent that they are incremental costs directly attributable to the equity transaction that otherwise would have been avoided. In other words, yung share issuance cost natin, these are the gastos, okay, or mga expenditures na na-incur natin in relation to the issuance of the shares. Okay? So kung hindi sana tayo nag-issue ng shares, hindi sana natin magagastos yan. Okay, so parang ganun lang naman yung concept niyan. So yan ay ibabawas natin sa ating share premium. Okay? Sige. Next tayo, treasury shares. So again, treasury shares are yung items that are issued pa rin pero ni-reacquire natin, so therefore hindi na siya outstanding. So ang general treatment lang natin dyan is for us to recognize the treasury shares at cost. Okay? Pagkatapos, again, kapag nag-acquire ka ng treasury share, kailangan mong magkaroon din ng restriction ng retained earnings. Tapos, kapag nire-issue mo na, i-release mo din yung portion ng treasury shares, ng retained earnings appropriated based dun sa amount ng treasury shares na na-reissue. Okay? Ang accounting natin dyan is cost method lang. Okay? So, kung magkano yung cost mo or magkano yung nagastos mo nung ni-reacquire mo yung shares, edi yun din yung ating i-recognize. Okay? So, yun. So, in the case of dividends later on, yung ating treasury shares ay hindi tatanggap ng dividends kasi hindi naman siya outstanding. Alright. We go to stock rights. So, ano yung stock rights naman? Yung stock rights natin, okay, it simply pertains to um, the right given to us for us or to shareholders for them to exercise the preemptive rights. In other words, ano ang preemptive right? Yung right to protect your interest in the in the corporation. So yung right mo na hindi mabawasan or hindi magalaw or ma-dilute or whatever yung share mo doon sa isang um, company. Okay, so yung stock rights, since preemptive rights lang yan, these are issued without consideration. So ibig sabihin, kapag nagkaroon ng stock rights, memorandum entry lang yan. Okay? So whether gamitin mo or whether gamitin ng shareholder, hayaan lang ng mag-expire or whatever, walang entry yon. Okay? Kasi magkakaroon lang ng entry kapag nag-exercise ka ng stock rights. Okay, yun lang naman yan. Kapag nag-expire, walang journal entry yun. Kasi nga, nung nagkaroon ng stock rights, memorandum entry lang yan. So, that is the difference between stock rights at saka stock warrants and stock options. Okay, kasi usually, magkakapare-parehas yung mga yan eh. Magkakaparehas yung tingin natin sa mga yan. Pero generally, pag sinabing stock rights, that is only for preemptive rights. So, ibig sabihin, walang sisingilin sa mga shareholders upon the issuance of the rights. Pero for stock warrants and stock options, yan yung mga may consideration. So, kailangan natin siyang gawan ng journal entry to be reflected in our share premium. Okay, so yan yan. We go to donated capital. Okay? So, yung donated capital natin, basically yan ay mga additional assets or additional shares that are given to us either by a third party or by a third party or by the shareholders mismo. Okay? In relation to giving additional resources doon sa ating corporation. Pero, of course, we need to consider yung mga items natin dyan. So, kapag may donation from shareholders, those are recorded as part of equity transaction or part yan ng share premium. Okay? Pero kapag donation from government yan, that is actually a government grant. So, it is going to be accounted for under IAS 20. Okay? Kapag naman donation from other sources, okay? So, ito ang treatment natin dyan. Okay, pag donation from other sources, ibig sabihin, hindi galing sa shareholder, hindi galing sa government, other sources yan. So, it is going to be recognized in profit or loss when the conditions attached to the donation are fulfilled or reasonably expected to be fulfilled, the donation becomes receivable, and the criteria for asset recognition is met. Okay? Which means that the only donated capital that is going to be recognized in equity are the donations coming from shareholders. Okay? The donations coming from shareholders are going to be either cash, non-cash assets, or the entity's own shares. Kapag cash item yan, edi automatic, debit mo lang yung cash or i-debit mo muna yung receivable kung hindi pa binibigay yung cash, nag-pledge lang ng amount, tapos credit mo na agad yung donated capital. Kapag non-cash asset naman yan, i-debit mo yung non-cash asset na na-receive mo at fair value, tapos i-credit mo yung ating donated capital. Okay? Tapos kung entity's own shares naman, kung baga sinabi ng shareholder, o ibibigay ko yung kalahati ng shareholdings ko as donation to the company. So kapag nagkaroon ng ganong klaseng donation, that is just recorded through a memorandum entry. Kasi hindi pa talaga nagte-take effect yung donation unless yung shares na dinonate ng shareholder ay na-issue na natin sa ibang shareholders or sa ibang party. Okay? So in other words, hihintayin pa nating ma-reissue natin yung donated shares na yan to other entities before we prepare an entry. Okay, so kapag ganon, ang gagawin mo is i-debit mo yung cash natin, tapos saka natin i-credit yung donated capital. Okay? And take note for in case of donated capital na merong related expenses, i-recognize natin as a deduction to donated capital yung amount na nagastos natin for those particular donations. Okay, so example, nakatanggap ka ng non-cash asset, fair value is 500,000, so debit ka ng non-cash asset 500,000, credit donated capital 500,000. Kaso gumastos ka ng 5,000 kunyari para maayos mo yung asset or for finalization of the transfer of title kunyari, ganun. So, ang gagawin mo doon, debit ka ng donated capital tapos credit ka ng cash. So, yun lang. Basta binabawas natin yung costs related to the donation doon sa donated capital natin. Okay, so yun yan. Sige, retained earnings tayo. So, retained earnings natin, ang mga transactions dyan na nakaka-affect will be yung restriction, yung appropriation, yung transactions relating to treasury shares na kailangang mag-absorb si retained earnings, and of course, yung ating dividends. So, ang retained earnings, yan yung taga-ipon ng lahat ng kinita ng company, including mga reclassification adjustments na kailangang ipasok sa equity or sa retained earnings later on. So kapag sinabi natin unrestricted or unappropriated, ibig sabihin ready siya for dividends. Kapag sinabi naman natin appropriated or restricted, gagamitin siya for other purposes, so hindi mo siya pwedeng i-issue as dividends. So your dividends could either be, yung mga basic lang tayo, cash dividends, property dividends, and share dividends. Kasi kahit sabihin mong may mga other kinds of dividends pa, almost the same din lang naman yung treatment. Basta ibabawas lang natin siya sa retained earnings. Okay. So yung cash dividends natin, of course, ang gagawin mo lang naman dyan, debit ka retained earnings, okay, tapos credit ka ng cash dividends payable. Tapos kapag ibabayad mo na, debit mo yung cash dividends payable, credit mo yung cash. Okay? Yung cash dividends natin, pwedeng ma-delay yung payment. Okay? So kung ma-delay yung payment, i-recognize mo muna siya as parang i-recognize mo muna siya as a parang other liabilities, okay? Such as scrip dividends or bond dividends. So, kapag sinabi nating scrip dividends, it pertains to a short-term short-term lang na madedelay yung payment ng ating dividends, kaya scrip muna siya. Okay, scrip dividends. Tapos kapag bond dividends naman, yung nag-declare ka ng dividend pero matagal pa or longer than 1 year before mong issue yung dividend na yun. Okay? So in this case, basta ang tatandaan lang natin dito, for scrip and bond dividends, ang binabawas lang natin sa retained earnings is the principal portion lang. Yung interest relating to the dividends is going to be recorded in P&L. Okay? Pero of course, kung iisipin mo yon, kapag pinasok mo naman sa P&L yun, eventually papasok mo din naman sa retained earnings, di ba? So at the end of the day, doon din lang papasok sa retained earnings yan. Okay, pero syempre, for journal entry purposes, ang laging tatandaan dyan, yung scrip and bond dividends, ang pinabawas lang natin sa retained earnings is the principal portion lang. Okay? Yung interest portion, i-recognize natin siya as interest expense sa ating P&L. Okay? Property dividends is also the same. Basta ang kailangan tandaan sa property dividends, we are going to recognize this at fair value. And then, share dividends, it's either a small or large dividend. Babawasan natin yung retained earnings with the purpose of issuing additional shares to our shareholders. So, ano yung mga usual items for dividends? Yung date of declaration, date of record, and date of distribution. So, date of declaration para malaman ng mga shareholders na ikaw ay magbabayad ng dividend. Date of record para malaman natin kung sino yung entitled doon sa dividend. So, ang isang important date for date of record is the ex-dividend date. Okay? Kasi during that time, Diyan natin malalaman kung sino yung ating or kung sino talaga yung tatanggap ng dividends. Kasi there is a possibility that in between the date of declaration and the date of record, magkaroon pa ng transactions wherein ipapasa ng isang shareholder yung shares niya sa ibang shareholder or sa ibang tao, di ba? So syempre kailangan nating malaman kung sino bang tatanggap, si seller ba or si buyer ng shares. Okay? Kaya usually in the process, mag-establish ng ex-dividend date yung company. Okay? Yung ex-dividend date is the date na kapag nakitransact ka on that date, hindi ka na entitled sa dividends. Okay? Ang usual pati sa Philippine Stock Exchange kasi transaction plus T plus 3 days. So ibig sabihin, generally, pag nakitransact ka today plus 3 days, so mag-establish sila ng 3 days ex-dividend date before the date of record. Okay? So pag in-establish nila yung date of record, magbibilang sila ng 3 days pabalik. Okay? Yun yung ex-dividend date. So yun ibig sabihin, kapag nakitransact ka on that date, on the ex-dividend date, wala ka ng right over the dividends. Okay? So yun yan. Okay. So, recognition of liability for dividends. So, under the provisions of IFRIC 17, you are going to recognize the dividend as a liability, okay? Whenever you meet this criteria, it's either you're going to recognize it on the date the dividend declared by management is approved by a relevant authority, kung kailangan ng further approval, or the date when management declares dividend if no further approval is required. Basta kung kailang sinabi ng management na magde-declare ng dividend. So, yun lang naman yan. So, that is basically for theory purposes lang. Yan. Tapos again, no, to reiterate, outstanding shares lang ang tatanggap ng dividend. So, outstanding shares pertain to shares that are issued and held by shareholders, okay? Kasama yung subscribed. Okay? Basta hindi delinquent. Okay? So, outstanding shares exclude yung mga unissued shares and yung treasury shares, of course. So, hindi yan tatanggapin or hindi yan tatanggap ng dividends later on. Yun. So, property dividends tayo, yung sinabi ko na kanina. Always remember, we are going to recognize the dividends as, or we're going to recognize the dividend at fair value later on. Okay? So, yun. May specific example naman tayo later on. So, yan. Yung sinasabi nating fair value, ito yun. Okay? So, the property dividend is initially measured at fair value of the non-cash asset at the date of declaration. Tapos, at every period, okay, at the end of each reporting period, and on the settlement date, we are going to remeasure the dividends, the property dividend at fair value pa rin. So, any change in fair value, recognize natin yon. Tapos, on settlement, the difference between the carrying amount and the dividends payable will be recognized in profit or loss ulit. So, di ba parang basta ang concept niyan, recognize mo at fair value, any difference, pasok mo sa P&L. Yun. Tapos, accounting for non-cash assets declared as property dividend. So, if the property dividend is a non-current asset, it shall be subject to the requirements of PFRS 5. Okay, so i-reclassify mo siya as non-current asset held for distribution to owners. And subsequently accounted for under PFRS 5 also. Yung asset na yon or yung non-current asset, non-cash asset na yon will be measured at the lower of its carrying amount and fair value less cost to sell or cost to distribute. If the property dividend is a current asset, it shall be accounted for under its previous accounting. No reclassification is needed. Okay, so yun lang yung item natin dyan. So in other words, kapag non-cash asset, okay, na generally considered as non-current asset, then kailangan mo siyang i-reclassify and follow the provisions of PFRS 5. Kapag current, wala na. No problem. Yan. So again, yung sinabi nating share dividends, no? So the share dividends could either be a small or large dividend. Bakit importante yan? Kasi kapag small share dividend yan, i-measure natin siya at fair value. So ibig sabihin merong share premium yung ating distribution later on. Kapag large naman siya, i-recognize natin at par or stated value. So ibig sabihin walang share premium na involved. Okay, paano mo malalaman kung large or small? Similar to our treatment of investment in associate. Diba? Kapag associate mo na, at least meron kang 20%. So, ganun din dito. Kapag ang ating dividend declaration is 20% or more of the outstanding shares, it will become a large stock dividend. Okay, kapag less than 20%, small lang yan. Okay. Yan. Preference shares, sinabi nga natin, since preference shares siya, meron siyang preference as to dividends and preference as to assets. So, laging siyang mauuna after nating isettle yung mga liabilities. Diba? Siyempre, kung may assets ka, priority natin is bayaran yung mga utang. Tapos, kapag equity na yung babayaran natin, prioritize muna natin na bayaran yung ating preference shares. So, discuss natin in detail yan kapag nasa book value per share na tayo. Okay. Dividends recognized as expense. Okay, so di ba generally dividends are supposed to be charged to retained earnings. However, dividends declared on financial liabilities such as redeemable preference shares are of course charged as part of interest expense kasi substance over form. In substance, it is liability. In form, it is equity. So ano susundan natin? Syempre, as if it is liability kasi in substance it is really liability. So hindi siya retained earnings but rather part of interest expense. But again, di ba, at the end of the day, i-close natin yung profit or loss sa retained earnings. So, retained earnings pa rin ang overall affected dyan. Okay. Dividends out of capital, yung sinasabi nating ikaw ay nag-issue ng dividends which is in excess of your retained earnings. Okay, usually nangyayari ito particularly sa wasting assets kasi under your wasting asset doctrine, di ba? Pwede kang mag-issue ng dividends, okay, in excess of your retained earnings. Okay, kasi gagamitin mo pa yung yung accumulated na depletion doon sa wasting asset. That is also yung amount nun is also allowed to be declared as part of dividends. Okay, so ibig sabihin, pag may ganyan na nangyari, dividends paid out of capital na yon, so magiging liquidated capital yung labas nun. Kasi liquidating dividends yung excess. So, disclosures. Okay, so kapag nagkaroon ng declaration, okay, it will be presented either in the statement of changes in equity or in the notes. Kasi that is for full disclosure purposes. Dividends declared after the reporting period but before the financial statements are authorized for issue are not recognized as a liability at the end of the reporting period kasi wala naman talagang obligation pero it is necessary for it to be disclosed because it is a non-adjusting event but still relevant to the understanding of the readers or the users of the financial reports. Yan. Recapitalization. Sinabi natin kanina pag recapitalization ang gagawin mo, you are simply going to change the structure or change the components of your shareholders' equity. Okay? Nangyayari ang recapitalization, okay? In various ways such as number 1, pag-change from par value to no par value or no par value gagawing par value. Babawasan natin yung par value or stated value para tumaas yung share premium or magkakaroon ka ng share split or reverse share splits. Okay, so yun yung mga possible types of recapitalization natin. So, kapag nagkaroon ka ng recapitalization, take note, it does not affect assets, liabilities, or total shareholders' equity. Kasi sa recapitalization, yung components lang ang nagbabago. Pero, in effect, sa shareholders' equity pa rin yung galawan niya. Okay? So, since napag-usapan na rin yung share split, okay? Pag sinabi nating split up, dadami yung shares. Okay? Dadami yung shares pero bababa yung par or stated value. Kapag naman split down, kokonti or mababawasan yung number of authorized shares pero tataas yung par value or stated value. Okay? Then finally, punta tayo sa quasi-reorganization. So the purpose of quasi-reorganization is yun nga, kapag yung company is in, kumbaga, ang pangit nung performance or ang pangit nung operations niya, hindi siya attractive for future investors or whatever, if they wanted to have a fresh start as an organization, gagawa sila ng parang kunyaring restructuring. So, quasi-reorganization. Okay? So, ang gagawin mo dyan is ang basic na ginagawa sa quasi-reorganization is number one, mag-revalue tayo ng assets and liabilities. Tapos number two, magkakaroon din ng recapitalization if needed. Okay, so yun yung usual na ginagawa dyan. So, pag sinabi nating revaluation or remeasurement of your assets, usually is going to result in upward or downward revaluation. Of course, syempre, hindi naman natin alam kung tataas ba or bababa yung value ng ating asset, no? Tapos, ang lahat ng mga effects niyan ipapasok natin sa retained earnings. Kasi ang pinaka-goal natin sana kapag nag-revalue tayo ng assets or liabilities, mababawasan yung deficit ng company or yung negative na retained earnings ng company. Okay? After mong gawin yon, kapag kunyari ginawa natin lahat, pero negative pa rin yung balance ng ating retained earnings, in other words, may deficit pa rin tayo, then we need to charge the deficit against the share premium. So usually, kapag sakto naman yung share premium pang-absorb, okay na. Doon na lang gagawin natin. I-debit natin yung share premium, i-credit natin yung retained earnings. Pero kapag kulang, okay, kapag kulang pa yung share premium na pang-absorb doon sa negative balance ng retained earnings, then you may need to have recapitalization resulting to a decrease in the value of the share capital or yung ating par values ng ordinary and preference shares, tapos ililipat mo ulit sa share premium para lang kumasya yung share premium na pang-absorb. Okay? Basta ang end goal dapat mag-zero out yung deficit. Okay? So disclosures required by relevant regulations are provided in the financial statements for a minimum period of 3 years. Okay? So kumbaga parang from the time na ikaw ay nagkaroon ng quasi-reorganization, for the next 3 years, dapat lagi naka-disclose yan. Para malaman lang ng mga readers na during the past 3 years, ikaw ay nagkaroon ng quasi-reorganization. Okay, so let's go to theory questions. We have 2 sets of theories. Dito muna tayo sa una. So let us have number 1. When shares with par value are sold, the proceeds shall be credited to. So with par value, so ibig sabihin kapag nag-issue ka, yung credit natin, una will be sa share capital, tapos yung sobra will be sa share premium. So the answer there is letter D. Okay? Number 2, when shares without par value are sold. So walang par value. The excess proceeds over stated value. So meron naman pala siyang stated value. E di, pwede pa rin nating malaman kung magkano yung excess. So that is still going to be reported in share premium. Next. If shares are issued for a consideration other than cash, paano natin i-measure yung consideration natin? Of course, we will measure it at fair value of the consideration received. Okay? Of course, there are other situations na traded yung shares. So kapag traded yung shares, ang basis natin will be yung fair value ng securities na natanggap natin. Or fair value ng shares natin mismo. Sorry. So traded kasi yung shares natin. So dapat yun yung basis. So it's up to, it depends on the situation. Pero generally, if the problem did not state na traded yung shares natin, then you use the fair value of the consideration transferred to us or yung natanggap natin. Number 4, kapag naman ikaw ay nag-issue ng shares, okay, pambayad sa utang. So ang gagawin natin is we're going to recognize the credits to shareholders' equity based on the amount of the liabilities na 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 babayaran natin. So it's either the fair value. So parang ang concept kasi ng number 4, babalikan mo yung troubled debt restructuring natin, di ba? So, or parang yan, equity swap yung mangyayari dyan. So, sundan lang natin. Pero basically, unahin natin syempre alapin yung value ng shares or ng utang or yung fair value ng utang na binayaran. So, that's letter C. Number 5, kapag naman ikaw ay nag-issue ng shares, kapalit ng services na natanggap mo, take note, dapat ito ay services ng unrelated party. Kasi kapag ang nag-render ng service ay employee, hindi natin pwedeng ma-measure yung fair value ng service. Kasi related sa atin yan. Hindi natin pwedeng i-base dun sa sweldong pinabayad natin sa kanya. So, in this case, for services of outside parties, then we will measure the equity based on the fair value of the service na na-receive natin. So, that's letter A. Kapag empleyado yan, that is going to be covered by share-based payments natin. Or IFRS 2 later on. Number 6, okay, so treasury shares shall be recorded at cost irrespective of whether these are acquired below or above the par value. So, the cost of the treasury shares acquired from or for non-cash consideration is usually measured by the amount of the non-cash asset that we surrendered. Okay? Or basically, yung carrying value natin. So, the answer there is letter B. So, hindi natin i-remeasure yung ating non-cash asset na pinangbayad sa treasury shares. No need to do that. Kasi hindi naman dividend transaction to eh. This is a simple acquisition of your shares para maging treasury share siya. So, recorded amount or the carrying amount lang ang gagamitin. That is your actual cost already, which is consistent with the historical cost measurement natin. So, number 6 is letter B. Number 7, the total cost. Okay, wait lang. Yan. The total cost of the treasury shares shall be reported as deduction from shareholders' equity. Letter A. Okay, so A natin yan. Obvious naman, wala namang trick yung question na yan. Number 8, if treasury shares are reissued for non-cash consideration, so i-reissue na natin si treasury share, the proceeds shall be measured by, okay, so ang gagawin dyan, nakatanggap tayo ng non-cash assets nung nire-issue natin. So ang debit natin dyan will be yung ating non-cash asset which should be measured at fair value. Okay? So that is letter B. So fair value ng non-cash consideration, credit natin yung treasury share at cost. Any difference is going to be recognized as either kapag excess yon, then that's going to be share premium treasury share. Kapag kulang naman, papa-absorb natin kay retained earnings. So that's going to be letter B. Number 9, which statement is incorrect concerning treasury shares? Okay, so obvious naman yung A, B, and D. Tama talaga yun. Okay, the answer is letter C. Treasury shares may be recognized as financial assets. Okay, hindi pwede maging financial asset yung sarili mong equity. Okay, financial assets are only assets that are items that are equity securities or debt securities of other entities. Okay, so letter C yan. Number 10, loss from treasury shares, okay, shall be charged to. Okay, so kapag nag-reissue tayo ng treasury shares pagkatapos nalugi, okay, ang first bakit nalugi? Kasi mas mababa yung consideration na natanggap natin compared doon sa cost ng treasury shares. So, ang first mong gagawin is i-charge natin kung meron man tayong share premium treasury shares. Okay? Doon muna natin ibabawas. Tapos kung naubos na or kung wala man, then ipa-absorb natin kay retained earnings. This is different kapag retirement. Kasi kapag retirement, ang gagawin natin is magsisingit ka pa ng isang item dito which is the share premium from original issuance. Bago yung share premium treasury shares at bago yung retained earnings. So, yun lang naman yung difference ng retirement at saka reissuance. 11. Gains and losses on retirement of treasury shares shall not be included in determining income, but it is going to be recognized as part of your share premium. Letter D. Tapos again, kapag hindi kaya ng yung kasi gain naman to, so automatic share premium, pero just in case magkaroon ng loss, that's going to be again treated as a deduction. First, to share premium original issuance. Second is share premium treasury shares. At third is retained earnings. Kung nalugi. Pero pag nag-gain, kasi mas mataas yung consideration natin upon the mas mataas yung cost ng treasury share. Mas mababa yung cost ng treasury share as compared doon sa original issuance, then that's going to be treated as a share premium treasury share pa rin. Okay? 12. Loss on retirement. Yung sinabi natin kanina, kapag nalugi kasi nag-retire tayo ng treasury shares, meaning mas malaki yung cost ng treasury share compared to the original issuance of the shares, then you allow the share premium from original issuance muna na mag-absorb ng lugi. Kapag hindi kaya, share premium treasury shares. Kapag kulang pa rin, retained earnings ang mag-absorb. So, yan yung order of priority natin dyan. Okay, next. 13. Okay, it is the issuance by another entity of its own shares to shareholders without consideration and under conditions indicating that such action is prompted mainly by a desire to increase the number of shares, okay, outstanding for the purpose of effecting a reduction in unit market price that is known as share split or stock split. Letter A. Next, subscriptions receivable. Okay? And other receivables from sale of shares which are not collectible currently shall be presented as, okay, again, whether that is collectible currently or not collectible currently, since that is a receivable from a share transaction or from a share capital transaction, this amount is always recorded as a deduction to your shareholders' equity. Okay, dun sa share capital section natin. So that's letter A. Next, 15. Deposits on subscriptions to a proposed increase in share capital shall be reported as letter B, part of shareholders' equity, parang deposits, okay, or initial amounts. Kasi ang labas dyan, hindi naman pwedeng maging subscriptions agad yan kasi hindi pa nga approved yung proposed increase ng share capital. So magkakaroon lang ng actual subscription kung approved na yung increase in share capital. So ang gagawin mo kapag naka-receive ka ng initial deposit, that's going to be a debit to cash, tapos a credit muna to pwede siyang ano bang magandang accounting? Kasi usually, depende yan sa account title ng company. Pwedeng share subscription deposits, yung mga ganon. Or simply subscription deposits, mga ganon lang. So whatever, basta dapat ang treatment natin doon sa deposit na natanggap natin is a part of shareholders' equity. Letter B. Okay, 16. Accounting for shareholders' equity. Okay. The accountant is primarily concerned with which of the following? Okay. Ano ba ang pinaka-concern natin sa shareholders' equity? Yung pinakita natin sa taas, yung proper accounting ng mga components. So the answer there is letter C. Recording the source of each of the various elements of the shareholders' equity. 17. Okay? Contributed capital does not include. Ano ang hindi contributed capital dyan? Siyempre, yung share premium, kasama yan sa share capital transaction, preference share, capital resulting from reissuance of treasury share, share capital pa rin yan. Letter D, capital accumulated by retention of earnings, kasi retained earnings yan. Diba sinabi ko kanina, yung treasury shares actually pwede maging part ng component ng share capital yan. Pero for purposes of disclosure lang na itong treasury share na to ay resulting from the acquisition of your own shares, pwede mo siyang i-recognize as a separate element. That is better for full disclosure. Okay? Pero yung retained earnings, that is really a different or a separate component of shareholders' equity. So letter D yan. 18. Ano ang discount on share capital? Di ba sinabi natin, discount on share capital is a deduction. Okay? Pero, di ba sabi natin, sisingilin natin yan later on dun sa ating mga shareholders kasi bawal nga yung issuance of shares below par or stated value. So, pag sinabi mong may be recorded as either an asset or an expense, hindi. Kasi that is just recorded as a deduction to shareholders' equity. Shall be close to income summary account, hindi nga siya part ng profit or loss, di ba? Hindi siya part as expense. So, hindi siya pwedeng i-close sa income summary. It will stay in shareholders' equity until masettle. So, hindi rin pwedeng letter C, i-offset mo siya sa share premium. Okay? Kasi, bawal yun. Okay? Hindi pwedeng i-offset mo yung discount doon sa share premium. Kasi yung discount is a separate item na kailangan nga nating ipasettle or ipabayad ulit sa ating shareholders later on. So letter D ang sagot, none of the above. 19. An ordinary share does not possess which of the following? Okay? Right to share in the earnings, right to vote, right to direct ownership of corporate assets, right to share proportionately. Okay, so the answer is letter C. Kasi you do not own the assets. Okay? You own the interest in the company. Okay? So hindi ibig sabihin na meron kang direct ownership over the corporate assets kasi ang hawak mo lang is your interest in the net assets of the company. So letter C sagot dyan. 20. Which of the following is not one of the basic rights of a shareholder? Okay. Right to participate, right to maintain proportional interest, right to participate in the proceeds for liquidation, right to inspect the accounting records of the corporation. So the answer is letter D. May pinresent tayo dun sa taas, di ba? 4 yung main na basic rights natin. Yung right to inspect is a secondary right only. Okay? So yung mga basic natin is yung right for yung sa earnings, yung sa dividends, yung sa liquidation, okay? Tapos yung right to vote, di ba? Yun yung basic na 4. Sige, 21 tayo. Okay? An entity issued rights to its existing shareholders to purchase unissued ordinary shares at more than par value. Share premiums would be recorded when the rights are exercised. Kasi 'di ba, kapag nag-issue ka ng stock rights, memo entry lang 'yun. Kapag nag-expire yung stock rights, memo entry lang 'yun. So the only situation na magkakaroon ka ng journal entry for stock rights is kapag in-exercise ang stock rights. So letter B. 22. Which of the following is issued to shareholders of a corporation to acquire its unissued or treasury shares within a specified time at a specified place? Okay, this is issued to shareholders, okay, to acquire its unissued or treasury shares within a specified time at a specified price is known as share warrants. Okay, so in other words, bibilhin mo yan. Bibilhin mo yung rights na yan. Okay? 23, share warrants outstanding shall be reported as part of share premium. Okay, kaya nga whether ma-exercise yan or hindi, that is still going to end up in share premium eventually. 24, when the total shareholders' equity is smaller than the amount of the contributed capital, this deficiency is called a deficit or a negative retained earnings. 25. The par value of an ordinary share represents the legal nominal value assigned to the share as approved in your articles of incorporation. So that's letter C. 26. When collectibility is reasonably assured, the excess of the subscription price over the stated value of the no par subscribed share capital shall be recorded as part of share premium on the date of subscription mismo. Okay, so ang entry mo doon, debit ka ng subscriptions receivable, credit ka ng subscribed share capital, tapos credit ka ng share premium. So yung share premium mo, automatic record mo na agad yun. Okay. 27. The issuance of preference share, letter A, increases preference share outstanding. Of course. Diba? Has no effect on preference share outstanding. Direct opposite ng sagot natin. So, mali na yan. Increases preference shares authorized. The authorized capital does not change. Okay? Kasi naka-fix na yung amount na yan. Okay? So, the only item that is going to be affected by share capital transactions will be the issued, the outstanding. Okay? Yun yung dalawang yun. The issued at saka outstanding lang ang maapektuhan ng share issuance natin. Okay? Pero hindi niya magagalaw yung authorized. So the answer is letter A. 28. When an entity redeemed all of its preference shares for more than the original issue price. Okay, so ni-redeem yung preference share more than issuance price. So ang labas dyan is parang lugi ka, no? Kasi mas malaki yung binayad mo kaysa dun sa natanggap mo upon original issuance. The excess paid above the original issue price shall be letter D, charge against retained earnings. Okay. So ang tanong, sir, bakit wala akong nakikitang charge against share premium treasury shares and then charge against retained earnings? Kasi ina-expect mo, di ba sir, dapat ang order of priority, share premium, yung original issuance, share premium treasury shares, and then retained earnings. Yun sana yung structure natin or yung order of priority ng deduction. Pero kasi sa number 28, wala namang sinabing nanggaling sa treasury shares, di ba? Hindi naman sinabing acquired then retired. Wala namang sinabing gano'n. Ang sinabi lang, redeemed. Okay, or in other words, niretire natin yung preference shares, hindi naman siya dumaan sa treasury shares. So kung hindi dumaan sa treasury shares, bakit mo gagalawin yung share premium treasury shares? Automatic, yung kulang sa retained earnings agad tatama. So letter D yun. 29. When preference shares are purchased and retired by the issuing company. When preference shares are purchased and retired by the issuing company. Okay. For less than the original issue price. So, niretire natin siya ng mas mababa. Diba? So, parang niretire natin or binili natin yung treasury shares lower than the original issue price. So, ibig sabihin, kumita ka pa, di ba? So, yung difference is going to letter B, increase the contributed capital of the ordinary shares. Of course, kasi parang additional share premium natin yun. Okay? So, letter B. 30, kapag bumili ka ng treasury shares, ano ang affected? Okay? Always remember, treasury shares will result to a decrease in the issued, decrease in the outstanding but not the issued. Kasi parang ang labas, issued pa rin siya kasi hindi pa naman siya nire-retire, pero hindi na siya outstanding kasi hindi na siya hawak ng other shareholders or outside shareholders. So, letter C ang sagot natin dyan. Sorry. Okay, we go to part 2 of our theories. Okay, part 2 tayo. First question, non-stock dividends shall be recognized as liabilities on the date of declaration. So pag sinabing non-stock, of course, that pertains to either your cash or property dividends. Okay, so date of declaration tayo nag-recognize ng decrease in retained earnings and recognition of the liability. So letter A yan. Number 2, dividends payable in non-cash assets. Okay, shall be charged to retained earnings at the fair value of the non-cash asset and subsequently remeasured at fair value until settlement. Any change in fair value will be recorded in profit or loss. So letter B ang sagot sa number 2. Number 3, when shareholders may elect to receive cash in lieu of stock dividends, the amount to be charged to retained earnings is equal to the letter A, optional cash dividend. Kasi parang cash in lieu of stock dividends. So, di ba ang labas, ang babayaran na talaga ng ating shareholder or ang babayaran ng company is already cash. So, the dividends to be recognized will be the cash dividend already. Kasi hindi na nga tayo shares. Okay? Hindi shares. Cash tayo. Okay? 4. Treasury shares may be reissued as dividends. In which case, what amount should be charged to retained earnings? Siyempre, ang gagawin mo dyan, debit mo yung retained earnings, credit mo yung treasury shares. At what amount? At the cost of the treasury shares. Okay, so letter A. Number 5. If the stock dividend is less than 20%, how much of the retained earnings should be capitalized? So this is a small stock dividend. Kapag small yung stock dividend, we need to get the fair value of the shares. So that's letter B. Date of declaration, syempre kasi yun yung date na mag-recognize ka ng utang. 6. The issuer shall directly charge retained earnings for the par value. Okay? Par value of the shares issued in the case of a large stock dividend. Paano mo malalaman kung large stock dividend siya? Dapat at least 20% of the outstanding shares yung ating in-issue as dividend. So the answer there is letter C, 20% stock dividend. 7. Which is incorrect concerning stock dividends? The answer is letter A. A stock dividend gives rise to any change in either the entity's assets or its shareholders' proportionate interest therein. Ang stock dividend, inter-equity transaction lang yan. Mababawasan yung retained earnings, magi-increase yung share capital. So, walang effect yan sa assets. Okay? Hindi gagalaw yung asset, hindi rin gagalaw yung total shareholders' equity. So, the answer, ang incorrect dyan, letter A na. Yung letter B, stock dividends are recorded on the date of date declared, of course. Kapag issuance ng additional shares of 20% or more, ang ika-capitalize lang ay par or stated value. Tama din lang yon. In closely held entities, if stock dividends are declared, retained earnings shall be capitalized only to the extent of par value of the shares. Yes, kasi kapag closely held entities yan, malamang kapag nag-declare ka ng stock dividends, okay, large lahat yun. Okay? Kasi sila-sila din lang eh. Closely held entities naman yan eh. So, kumbaga sila-sila din lang yung tatanggap ng shares na may issue. Okay? 8. In certain cases, stock dividends are declared on the basis of a proposed increase in authorized share capital, the application for which have been filed but not yet approved by the SEC at the end of the reporting period. Under these circumstances, ano ang hindi pwedeng gawin? Okay, which may not be done. Okay? Letter A, the proposed increase and such dividend declaration generally shall not be reflected in the statement of financial position prior to SEC approval. Tama yun. Kasi wala ka pa naman talagang may gagawang entry kasi hindi ka pa nga naman authorized to do so. So, disclosure lang yan. This matter shall be disclosed in the notes to financial statements. Tama, kakasabi ko lang. Letter C, if the proposed increase is approved by SEC after the end of the reporting period but before the issuance of the statements, the new authorized share capital may be presented and the stock dividends may be shown as part of the issued share capital. That is also possible kasi ang nangyari lang dyan is para siyang adjusting event. Okay? So, letter D ang sagot, a note to the financial statements is unnecessary to disclose. Of course, automatic. Mali na yun kasi sinabi mo, hindi na daw kailangang mag-disclose. So, that is already the incorrect or that is already the item na hinahanap natin, yung hindi pwedeng gawin. Okay? Letter D. 9. Which is incorrect concerning retained earnings? Okay? Letter C, sabi, a deficit in retained earnings shall be presented as an asset. Okay, so obvious na obvious yung sagot. Kapag may deficit ka, edi negative amount lang yun. Sa shareholders' equity pa rin. Number 10, appropriations of retained earnings, if reflected in separate account, shall be shown as still part of equity under retained earnings pa rin. So it is simply a reclassification from unappropriated to appropriated, but it is still going to be presented as part of retained earnings. 11. An entity declared a cash dividend on its share capital in December of the current year, payable in January of the next year. Retained earnings would... So ano ba entry? Ang entry ng retained earnings sa date of declaration. Pagdating ng date of payment, ay date of record, wala naman tayo gagawin doon. May entry lang yan. para malaman natin kung sino yung tatanggap ng dividend. So, the date of payment, debit mo yung payable, credit natin yung cash. Okay? So, the answer is letter C, not affected on the date of payment because it is only affected on the date of declaration. 12. The actual amount of a cash dividend to be paid is determined on the date of letter A, date of record. Okay, this is particularly applicable if there are additional issuances of previously unissued shares, okay, prior to the ex-dividend date. So, on the date of record, doon mo malalaman yung total amount ng dividends paid. Particularly if the declaration is on a per share basis. Kasi dalawang approach lang naman yan eh. Mag-declare ka ng cash dividend na total amount or per share basis. Pag sinabi natin total amount, regardless kung dumami yung na-issue na shares or nabawasan, basta ang total amount ng declaration mo, yun pa rin. Kunyari, 1 million, still 1 million. Pero, kapag per share basis yan, any fluctuation during the period before the ex-dividend date will result to either an increase or decrease in your total cash dividends na babayaran. So, date of record ang magdedetermine dyan kung magkano yung actual. Okay? 13, at the beginning of the current year, Sun Company purchased 500,000 shares of Star Company. At year end, Sun distributed 250,000 shares of Star as a dividend to Sun shareholders. This is an example of property dividend. Kasi yung shares natin kay Star Company is actually our investments. So kapag nag-issue ka ng investments mo sa shareholders, then that becomes a property dividend. A dividend which is a return to shareholders of a portion of their original investment is known as liquidating dividend. 15. How would the declaration of a liquidating dividend or how would the declaration of a liquidating dividend by an entity affect each of the following? Yung contributed capital, mababawasan. Diba? Kasi it is going to be, the liquidated capital is going to be a deduction to your share capital component. And kapag nabawasan yung share capital component, anong mangyayari sa total shareholders equity? It's also going to be decreased also. Kasi ang nangyari dyan, nabawasan, ang entry mo dyan is debit cut ng liquidating dividends or liquidated capital, tapos credit ka ng cash. So yung decrease ng cash mo, ang effect niyan will be a decrease in shareholders equity also. Kaya letter B ang sagot. Kasi baka iniisip mo, di ba dapat hindi maapektuhan yung total shareholders equity? Hindi kasi nga, nagbawas ka ng cash. Okay? Tapos, it is going to result in a decrease in the share capital. So, babawasan yung total shareholders equity mo. Hindi naman siya normal dividend transaction na equity to equity. Okay? Or share dividend transaction na equity to equity yung effect. Okay? So, an entity naman declared a dividend. Okay? A portion of which was liquidating. Okay? How would the declaration affect each of the following? So, yung contributed capital decrease ulit. Okay? Tapos yung retained earnings decrease syempre. Kasi nag-declare kang dividends, di ba? So, malamang mabawasan yung retained earnings mo. Yun nga lang, sobra pa sa retained earnings yung made-declare mong dividend. So, result nyan, decrease pa rin naman. Yun nga lang, sobra sa retained earnings. So, meron ka pang i-recognize as liquidating dividend. Kaya may decrease sa contributed capital. So, B ang sagot dyan. 17. Which of the following is most likely to be found in corporate laws regarding payment of dividends? Most likely to be found. Dividends may be paid from legal capital. Bawal yan. Okay? Retained earnings are available for dividends unless restricted by contract or by statute. So, correct yan. Yan na yung legal requirement natin, di ba, for appropriations of retained earnings. Unrealized capital is available for any type of dividend. Unrealized capital. Tapos, available for any type of dividend. Okay? So, unrealized capital nga, di ba? So, ibig sabihin is either unissued or not outstanding. So, mali yan. Letter D, capital from donated assets is available for dividends. Capital from donated asset is donated capital part of share premium or share capital. Hindi siya part ng retained earnings, so hindi siya pwedeng i-declare as dividend. 18. Which of the following would not affect the retained earnings balance? Conversion of preference share into ordinary share. Okay, would not affect ha. Kapag nagkaroon kasi ng conversion, preference papuntang ordinary shares, there is a possibility na matamaan yung retained earnings kung merong deficiency doon sa considerations. Kapag nag-share split, automatic, walang effect sa retained earnings. Kapag nag-reissue ng treasury shares, pwedeng matamaan si retained earnings. Kapag may kulang sa consideration, sa stock dividends, automatic affected si retained earnings. So, ang sagot ay share split. Okay, share split. 19. For which of the following purposes should an appropriation for possible loss contingencies be established? Okay? Letter D ang sagot. To inform shareholders that a portion of the retained earnings should be set aside from amounts available for dividends because of such contingencies. Okay? To match applicable cost with current revenue, to reduce fluctuations in net income, to charge operations. Okay, so the only reason lang naman kung bakit ka nag-appropriate ng retained earnings is basically for us to make sure na alam ng shareholders na hindi natin pwedeng i-declare as dividend yung portion na to kasi nakaset aside siya for a particular contingency. So the answer is letter D. Take note, ito kasing mga to, yung letter A, letter B, and letter C all talks about a possible effect on profit or loss. Hindi naman nakaka-affect sa profit or loss yung mga establishment of appropriation ng retained earnings. Okay, 20. Which statement is correct concerning appropriations of retained earnings? Appropriations reduce the total retained earnings? Mali. Parehas pa rin yung total niyan. Direct classify lang. The only proper way to eliminate an appropriation of retained earnings after it has served its purpose is to revert it to unappropriated. Tama, di ba? Kapag hindi mo na kailangang i-appropriate, ibalik mo. Unappropriated. So, tama yun. Letter C, an appropriation of retained earnings means that assets are segregated for specific purposes. Mali. Hindi ibig sabihin na nag-appropriate ka, may asset din na kailangang i-reclassify. Hindi yan. Tama, mali yan. When treasury shares are purchased, retained earnings must be appropriated equal to the par value. Wrong. Cost dapat. So, mali din. So, letter B ang sagot. 21. An entity issued what is called a 20% stock dividend or a large stock dividend. Magkano yung i-recognize natin na debit to retained earnings? Yung amount ng par value lang ng dividend. So, letter B. The issuer should charge retained earnings for the market value of the shares issued in A. Pag 145, that's 20%. So, large yun. So, par value. 148 is, wait, para sure. 1 divided by 8. Okay, that's 12.5. So, mababa na yun. 12.5 is a small stock dividend. Okay? So, in that case, kailangan nating mag-recognize ng stock dividend at the market price. Stock split, walang effect sa retained earnings yan. So, the answer is letter B. Okay? 23, how would the declaration of a 15% stock dividend by an entity affect each of the following? Retained earnings, mababawasan. Total shareholders equity, no effect. Kasi, yung binawas mo sa retained earnings, papasok lang sa share capital. So, no effect sa total shareholders equity. 24, how would the declaration and subsequent issuance of a 10% stock dividend by the issuer affect each of the following? Okay? When the market value of the shares exceed the par value of the shares. Yung share capital, tataas. Yung share premium, tataas pa rin. Siyempre, kasi kapag 10% stock dividend yan, debit kang retained earnings for the market value of the shares, credit ka ng share capital for the par value or stated value, and share premium for the excess. So, mag-i-increase pa rin yan. So, the answer is letter D. Okay. Yun. 25. The peso amount of total shareholders' equity remains the same when there is letter C. Declaration of stock dividend. Kasi kapag issuance of preference shares in exchange of convertible debentures, tataas ang total shareholders' equity. Nag-issue ka ng non-convertible bonds with share warrants, tataas ang equity because of the share warrant component. Declaration of a cash dividend, tataas ang utang, bababa ang total shareholders equity kasi yung debit mo sa retained earnings, ang credit niya payable, which is a liability. So maapektuhan yung total shareholders equity. So yung letter C, yan yung mag-remain na the same kasi equity to equity yung effect niya. 26. Unlike a share split, a stock dividend requires a formal journal entry in the financial accounting records because letter D, stock dividends represent a transfer from retained earnings to share capital. Yung share split kasi, di ba, puro memo entry lang lahat yung gagawin mo doon, kaya walang entry. 27. How would the retained earnings be affected by the declaration of each of the following? Nag-declare ka ng stock dividends, mababawasan yung retained earnings. Nagkaroon ka ng share split, walang effect sa retained earnings yun. Diba? Sabi nga natin, memo lang lahat yun, memo entry. So letter D sagot. 28. Assuming the issuing entity has only one class of share capital. Okay? Meaning ordinary lang. A transfer from retained earnings to share capital equal to the market value of the shares issued is ordinarily a characteristic of letter A, stock dividend but not a share split. Diba? Nagbabawas ka ng retained earnings, papasok siya sa share capital. So malamang ang dahilan ay nag-recognize ka ng stock dividend. So letter D. 29. When a dividend is declared and paid in stock, dividend is declared and paid in stock, what will happen? Ulit-ulit na yan, letter A. Total shareholders equity does not change because that is a transfer from one equity component to another. Undistributed stock dividend shall be reported as letter B. An addition to shareholders capital, also known as your stock dividends distributable. Okay, so yun yung answer natin. Number 30, that's the last item for the second part ng ating theory questions. Okay, so let's have first our practice set. Okay, para lang punta muna tayo sa mga basics lang na. Okay, so number 1 muna tayo, pinapatanong sa atin magkano yung total shareholders equity. So pwede mo nang i-prepare din yung calculator mo para at least mas mabilis yung computation. So binigyan ka ng mga components ng equity dito or whatever. Hindi natin alam kung part ng equity or hindi. Pinapakompute lang sa atin yung total shareholders equity. So common stock automatic kasama na yung 600,000 na yan. Additional paid in capital na 800,000 kasama na rin yan. Treasury stock at cost kasama yan pero minus 50,000. Unrealized loss on financial asset at FOC is included kasi part ng OCI yan pero deducted kasi unrealized loss, so minus 20,000. Tapos retained earnings appropriated and unappropriated, parehas lang namang retained earnings yan, so i-add na natin yan, 150 tsaka 200,000. So that's 1,680. Okay, so yun yung sagot natin sa question 1. 1,680,000. We go to the second item. Medyo dami kasi component. Wait, iayos lang natin. Para kasha. Okay. So we have the items here. Hindi nakaayos, no? Magulo yung mga items niya. Okay, tinatanong sa atin magkano yung total shareholders equity, magkano par value ng preference share, tapos magkano legal capital. Okay, so isa-isahin mo yan natin. Unahin natin yung total shareholders equity. So labas ulit tayong calculate, tapos hanapin na lang natin yung mga total dyan. Okay, so unrealized gain on financial asset at FOC, net amount, so 200,000 na yan. Pagkatapos, subscribed ordinary share na 500,000, dagdag din natin yan. Excess of par ordinary share and excess of par preference share pertains to share premium. So i-add na natin yung 900 na lang kasi 500 plus 400, so 900,000 diretso. Tapos excess of market value over par on ordinary share dividends. So in other words, this pertains to yung ating share premium relating to our share dividends. So, tingnan natin kung merong share dividends distributable or share dividends payable. Ito yun. Okay? So, since meron tayong share dividends payable dito na 1 million, ibig sabihin, itong excess of market value over par is the share premium associated with your share dividends distributable. So, since hindi pa daw na-distribute, hindi mo na niya sinama automatic sa share premium. So, dagdag pa rin yan. Plus 200,000. Oops. Wait, nagulo na yung computation ko. Ulit. So that's 200,000 plus 500,000 plus 500,000 plus 400,000 plus 200,000. Donated capital plus 600,000. Ordinary share capital plus 8 million. Share dividends payable plus 1 million. Preference share capital plus 1 million ulit. Accumulated profits unappropriated plus 1,500,000. Accumulated profits na reserved, i-add mo lang lahat yan, plus 5,300,000. Tapos treasury share at cost minus 800,000. So that is 18,400,000. That is your total shareholders equity. So straightforward naman yung computation, wala namang issue dyan. Magkano daw par value ng preference shares? So, yung preference share natin, 2,000 shares outstanding daw siya. So, yung 1 million na total niya, i-divide lang natin ng 2,000 shares na outstanding. So, that's going to be 500 pesos na par value. Okay, so parang wina-work back lang natin. And then, next question, how much is the legal capital? So, ang legal capital natin is the total par value of all shares issued and subscribed, di ba? So, kunin natin yung ordinary share capital dito. Okay? Ordinary share capital dito na 8 million. Tapos, yung preference share capital na 1 million. Plus yung subscribe. So, saan pa yung subscribe doon? Yung, ano yun? Share, may subscribe. Ayun, subscribe ordinary share, 500,000. That's 9,500,000. Okay? Huwag mo munang isama yung share dividends payable. Kasi pag share dividends payable or distributable, hindi pa siya issued and outstanding, di ba? So, hindi pa siya pwedeng isama. Okay? Kaya 9,500,000 pa lang ang legal capital. Total par value, kasi binigay naman na may par value siya. So, total par value of all shares issued and outstanding. Okay? Or all shares issued. Okay. Next, number 3 tayo. So, the company issued 6,000 shares of its 100 par ordinary shares as compensation for 1,000 hours of legal services performed. So, usual billing daw nung service provider is 500 per hour of legal service. On the date of issuance, the shares were selling at a public trading at 150 per share. What amount should the share premium account be increased as a result of the issuance of those shares? So, di ba? Ang concept dyan is, generally, you are going to account for the shareholders' equity transaction or the issuance of shares based on the fair value of the services performed. Yun nga lang, ang problema, sinabi lang usually bills. That does not mean na yun yung fair value ng services. Mas reliable na gamitin natin yung selling price ng ating shares because it is traded at the public market or at a public trading or an active market. So, ang result dyan, 6,000 shares. Share premium lang ang tinatanong. 6,000 shares, multiply natin nung share premium component, which is the difference between the par value and the current market price. So, 150 minus 150 lang yun. So, times 50, that's 300,000. So, the answer for number 3 is wala namang letters, 300,000. Number 4, on February, the company issued 1,000 shares of its 10 peso par common shares and 2,000 shares of its 10 peso par convertible preferred shares for a lump sum price of 40,000. At this date, the company's common stock was selling for 18 per share and the convertible preferred shares is 13.50 per share. Okay? How much is the increase in the APIC of the preferred shares as a result of the transaction? So of course, what we need to do here is we need to compute first for the kailangan muna natin i-compute yung relative fair market values ng mga yan kasi yun yung magiging basis ng allocation natin. Okay, so yung relative fair market values natin. Okay, so para doon sa preference shares, yung preference shares natin, that's going to be 2,000 shares at 13.50. Okay, so that's going to be 2,000 times 13.5. That's going to be 27,000. Okay, tapos para kay ordinary shares, yung ordinary shares naman daw natin ay 1,000 shares currently trading at 18. So that's going to be 18,000. Okay, so pag tinotal natin to, that's going to be 27 plus 18. So that's going to be 45,000. So ratio and proportion, ang tinatanong is kay preferred lang. So mag-focus tayo kay preferred. So 27,000 tayo dito. So that's going to be 27,000. Layo natin konti. Divided by 45,000. Tapos times total lump sum price na 40,000. Ratio and proportion lang yan. So that's going to be 27 divided by 45 times, or the 60% times 40,000. That's going to be 24,000. Okay? 24,000. Tapos ibawas natin ngayon sa 24,000 yung kanyang par value. 2,000 shares, 10 pesos. That's going to be 20,000. Okay, par value. So, ang lalabas dyan will be 4,000 share premium. Okay? So, yun yung answer natin for number 4. Okay? Number 5. Below are the pertinent information about John Jones Company. The equity section daw as of December. Common shares, share premium, treasury shares, retained earnings. On June 20, 70% of the treasury shares were reissued for 16 per share. Stock issue cost amount to 500. On July 20, the remaining treasury shares were retired. Question, how much is the net increase in the share premium as a result of the reissue of the treasury shares? And how much is the balance of the retained earnings after the retirement of the treasury shares? So, gawin lang natin yung entries natin para at least ma-gets natin kung paano yan. Okay, so ang nangyari, yung ating treasury shares, kung 1,000 shares yan, tapos 15,000 yan, ibig sabihin, nabili natin siya ng 15 pesos per share. Noong June 20X3, 70% were reissued. So, debit tayo ng cash dito. Magkano yung cash na matatanggap mo? That's going to be, kung 70% yon, that's going to be 700,000, no? 700. Okay, that's basically yung 1,000 dito times 0.7 or 700 shares of the treasury ini-reissue for 16 per share. So times 16 tayo dito. So that's going to be 11,200. Okay? Credit tayo dito ng treasury shares. Yung treasury shares natin, naka-recognize yan at cost. Okay? So alam na natin na 15 pesos per share yan kasi 15,000 divided by 1,000 treasury shares. So that's 15. Nire-issue mo yung 700, yung lalabas dyan ay 10,500. Okay? So ibig sabihin, meron tayo ditong i-recognize na share premium. Share premium treasury shares, which is the difference ng 11,200 at saka yung 10,500. So may 700 dito na lalabas. Okay? Yun nga lang, sinabi, may stock issue cost ka na 500. So ang gagawin mo doon, debit ka ng share premium, treasury shares na 500, credit ka ng cash dito, 500. So net effect, 700 yung tinaas, 500 yung binaba. So net effect niya is 200 lang. Okay? Pagkatapos, recognize naman natin yung retirement. Okay? The remaining daw treasury shares were retired. So paano mo i-retire yun? Okay? So una, i-debit natin yung common shares. Okay. Magkano yung amount ng common shares? Di ba 10 pesos yun na par value times 300. So that's going to be 3,000. Okay? So 3,000 yun na kasi wait lang natin konti. Yan. That's basically yung naiwan na 300 shares na hindi na reissue, i-retire natin, ang par value nun ay 10. Okay? Next. Debit pa ulit tayo dito ng share premium OS or yung original issuance natin dyan. Ang tanong, magkano? Okay? So, syempre, kailangan natin i-determine yan based on the given information. Kung ang common shares 10 par value, 100,000 daw lahat yan. So, that's going to be 100,000 divided by 10 na par value. So, 10,000 shares yun. Tapos, ang share premium mo ay 20,000. So, 20,000 na share premium divided by 10,000 shares na total na common shares. So, ibig sabihin 2 or 2 pesos ang ating share premium per share. So, therefore, yung i-debit natin dito kapag i-retire natin yung 300 shares is 300 shares times 2 pesos. So, 600 pesos yun. Okay? Ngayon, bago natin ituloy, alamin natin yung credit sa treasury shares. Okay? Yung treasury shares na hindi na-issue, yun yung, or na-reissue, yun yung 15 pesos times 300 shares. So, that's 4,500, di ba? 4,500. Okay. So, 3,000 na yung na-debit at saka 600. Kulang pa. So, kailangan pa nating magbawas. Anong ibabawas natin? Yung share premium treasury shares. Eh, di ba ang laman lang ng share premium treasury shares natin ay 200 na lang. So, ibig sabihin, papa-absorb natin yung hindi kayang i-absorb ng mga unang items sa retained earnings. So, magkano yun? 4,500 minus 3,000 minus 600 minus 200. So, 700 pa yung kailangang ipa-absorb kay retained earnings. So, as a result, kung papansinin mo, ano ang mangyari? Yung retained earnings na 200,000, because of the transactions here, mababawasan pa siya ng 700. So, yung 200,000, bawasan mong 700, 199,300 na lang yung balance niya. So, that is our answer for that problem. Okay. Number 6 tayo. The office company's shareholders' equity on June 30, 2021 consisted of the following. Okay. So we have ordinary share premium, accumulated profits, and losses. Okay. On August 1, 2021, the company issued rights to shareholders to subscribe to additional shares of its ordinary share. One right was issued for each share owned. So 1:1, so 4,000 shares yon, so 4,000 rights din. Okay? A shareholder could purchase one additional share for 10 rights, okay, plus 60 pesos cash. The rights expire on November 30, 2021. On August 1, 2021, the market value of the share with the rights attached was 160, while the market price of the rights alone was 8 pesos. How much should the office company's accumulated profits and losses account decrease as a result of the issuance of the stock rights on August 2021? Okay, ang sagot ay 0. Because stock rights are, ang haba ng kwento, no? So, 0 pa rin ang sagot niyan because the stock rights are amounts, okay, that are issued without consideration. Okay? Wala namang sinabing naningil eh, di ba? So, yun yung amount natin dyan. 0 yan. Okay. Kasi stock rights. Okay? Kung warrant sana yan or tawag dito, kung warrants man yan or options, mag-recognize tayo. Kahit sinabi pang ganito, yung may ganito, attach was 160, blah, 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 that's not considered as an item na i-recognize natin. Kasi wala naman tayong i-recognize for that particular stock right. Okay, so 0 sagot kasi stock right siya. Okay, last number, 7 na. Practice it. So, the company issued 1,000 share warrants for a consideration of 10 per warrant. O yun, may consideration yan. The holders of the warrants entitled them to purchase 1 share of the company's 50 par value shares for 80 pesos. Okay, 80% of the warrants or the warrant holders exercised the warrant while the remaining did not exercise the warrant until it expired. As a result of the exercise and the expiration of the warrant, how much did the share premium increase? Okay. So, una, debit tayo ng cash dito. Okay, wait. Ilagyan natin siya ng ibang kulay. Okay, so debit tayo ng cash dito. Yung cash na natanggap natin for the warrants is 1,000 times 10 pesos. So, 10,000 yan. Okay, ito ay magiging stock warrants outstanding or share warrants outstanding. Okay, so yan yun. Okay, pagkatapos, the holders of the warrants entitled them to purchase 1 share. So parang 1:1 yan kapag silent yung problem. So 80% of the warrant holders exercise. So nung in-exercise yung warrant, anong mangyari dyan? So debit ulit tayo ng cash dito. Ang cash na matatanggap natin, kung 1,000 warrants yun, 80% ang nag-exercise. Okay? So na yun, 80%. So 80% is 800, di ba? So calculate natin, 800 shares. Pagkatapos, bibilhin sa atin ng 80 pesos times 80. So that's 64,000. Pagkatapos, credit tayo dito ng ordinary shares for the par value. Sorry, may nakalimutan tayong i-debit. Debit mo rin yung share warrants outstanding. Kasi yung share warrants outstanding natin, that is basically yung 8,000. Okay, para doon sa portion ng ating warrants na na-exercise. Okay, so ordinary shares natin dito. Okay, sorry. That's going to be equal to kung magkano man yung par value ng 8,000 shares. That's 50 pesos, di ba? So that's going to be 800 shares lang times 50 pesos. So that's going to be 40,000. Okay? Tapos yung may iwan is going to be share premium. Share premium. So magkano yung share premium natin dito? So that's going to be 64,000 plus 8,000 minus 40,000. That's 32,000. Okay? Pagkatapos yung mga hindi nag-exercise, mag-expire yung share warrants niyan. So entry niyan, share warrants outstanding na 2,000, yung hindi na-exercise na portion, papasok din lang yan ng share premium. Kasi ganun din lang eh. Pag hindi na siya na-exercise, mag-expire na siya. So, kaya whether exercise or not, that's going to result to an increase in share premium na 2,000 yung naiwan. So, total, anong effect niya sa share premium? Increase the share premium as a result of that. So, mag-i-increase ng 32 plus 2,000. Okay, kaya ang sagot natin ay 34. So, that's the answer for our practice sets.